Like a lot of other people who grew up in the I-15 corridor, I had several home wards. I mean, even though I lived in the same house for 15 years, I was a member of 6 wards in 2 stakes and attended 3 different buildings. It always changed and shifted as the town grew around us. I loved Idaho then. I love it still. But my wards weren't necessarily a great thing for me. In fact, when I think back on it, all of the memorable, direct, negative experiences with the church, or with church members that I had, occurred in Idaho Falls. And considering that I've had a lot of experiences in various places, that's kind of impressive, and I've spoken and written about several of these elsewhere, so I'm not going to reiterate them at present. But last weekend, while home, um, I went to Sunday school because I like going to Sunday school. It's always nice getting to go to Gospel Doctrine because I teach a Sunday school class that is in Gospel Doctrine in my own ward. Uh, but there aren't enough lessons in the lesson manual as there are weeks in the year. This is probably yeah, so it just happens. Um, and so the teacher, who was somebody I'd seen before but didn't actually know, he was newer to that ward since I left it. Granted, I left it like a long time ago. Um, and so what he decided to do instead, since they didn't have any more lessons, was to have people do a retrospective on the previous year's studies. So they were looking at. He asked people to get up and share what they had gained from studying the New Testament that year. Whether it was a specific person they learned more about, one of their heroes from the New Testament story that appealed to them, how their testimony had been strengthened from studying the New Testament, things like that. Now, as often happens when you turn the time over to the congregation, it didn't, the plan did not survive first contact with the enemy. The first person who came up talked about miracles that happened in his family's life this year. Great thing. I think only 4 or 5 people over the course of the 50 minutes actually talked about the New Testament, and that's okay. But most of them who talked about it talked about Peter or Paul or Jesus, which are great. But I was sitting there thinking about, because I'm a contrarian, I was sitting there thinking about the personal experiences that I've had and the people who, to me, make a difference. And since also it was pretty much only guys getting up, because that's kind of how it happens. Testimony meeting, you always have, at least in my experience, there's normally a couple sisters who give long-winded, very emotional testimonies. But there are normally more men that get up and speak, just because I don't know if it's culture or whatever. But so I was thinking about the women in the scriptures that mattered to me, because we talk about the men in the scriptures all the time. There are very many women. But I spent several weeks already covering Mary recently, and I wanted to do something different. And as I was thinking about that, I thought of it's one of my favorite New Testament stories. It's one of my favorite scripture stories, and it's one that I thought was especially poignant to share in my home ward. Because it's about someone who has a really, really bad experience with church leaders and church members. Um, in Matthew 15, let's set the stage. Matthew 10, 11, 12, Jesus does all kinds of miracles, right? He gets into fights with the Pharisees and Sadducees, which is what always happens. John says that Jesus is more than a prophet. He makes fun of some areas, talks about how the prophet's not without honor, saved his own country, feeds the 5,000, walks on the water. Crowds of people go up and swamp him. And then John the Baptist gets beheaded, which isn't fun. And he gets into more arguments with the scribes and Pharisees, and he needs a break. And his disciples need a break, right? And so they go to the coasts of Sidon and Tyre. Coasts is often translated as borders. They're out in the boonies, right? They're not in the city. They're away from Jewry. They are getting a much needed respite for some recharging. And while they are there, a Gentile woman seeks them out. It's a cool little fun fact here in Mark, which has more Greek influence, whereas Matthew is geared towards Jews, the Hebrews. She's referred to as a Syrophoenician. Phoenician. In Matthew, that's Mark 7. In Matthew 15, she's referred to as a Canaanite or a woman of Canaan. I don't remember exactly. And it's just this neat little difference between the two, how they're viewed in the different to the different writers. Much how we today, depend on our own personal experience with something, we would call somebody a general thing versus a specific thing. It's neat. Anyway, while they're there in these coasts of Tyre, on this break, this woman comes up to them and follows them around and cries and says, "Have mercy on me, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed of a devil." They're not in a city. They're not. This woman obviously is hunting them down in some strange way. However, she's doing it. And she follows them around for an undescribed period of time, and Jesus ignores her. And it gets to the point where she is being so direct that the disciples tell Jesus to just order her to leave because they're getting sick of her. And Jesus has been ignoring her, and she's just following them around asking for help. And Christ's response, he doesn't even talk to her. He turns to his disciples and he says, "I'm not sent any but the house of Israel." And she comes up again and says, "Help me." And he says, "It is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to the dogs." If you know anything about the law of Moses, if you know anything about observant Jews, they don't have dogs as pets. Right? Dogs are unclean. Whenever dogs come up in the Bible, it's a negative thing, pretty much. Dog is a term for male prostitutes. What we would say gigolo. It's like worse, It's like a male whore is a dog in the Old Testament. You have casting pearls before swine. Dog returns to its vomit. Dog is not a good word in the Bible. And that's what he's just called this woman. If anyone has any right to be offended by Christianity in the history of the world, it is this woman. She has just been called this unclean, filthy thing by the Son of God. But instead of getting ticked, instead of getting offended, instead of storming away, she says, "Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table." She takes what he says, and she turns it around. Then Jesus said unto her, "O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. Thy daughter is whole from this hour." And then he goes to his disciples, and he says, as he says about the Roman centurion, he says about a lot of Gentiles. I guess, no, does he? I don't remember now. Never have I seen such great faith in all the house of Israel. And this woman knew that it's not about the leaders. That it's not about being treated necessarily as nicely as you want to be treated. It'd be great if we were always treated nicely, but it doesn't happen. But she knew where the power was to heal her daughter. She knew that this was the Son of God. And she didn't care about how she was treated because she realized that. In our lives, our leaders are totally imperfect. Our friends, our families, they can all screw up, you know? But that's not what the gospel is about. That's not who we worship. We worship the Son of God. And He's the one who heals us. And at those times that we feel like no one's listening, at those times that we cry for help and feel forsaken, He's still there. And I doubt we will ever get as direct and specific of a rejection from the Son of God as this woman here did. But that doesn't mean we are truly rejected or that He doesn't care. And so that's what I got up and said. And that's what I know. Despite all the problems I've had, I know that He is there.